spirit of my great mentor and friend, the late Mrs. Mammie Mobley, and the legacy of her son, Emmett, for I believe, if not for the lynching of Emmett Till, there would not be a Keith Beauchamp filmmaker today. Without those who have lost their lives throughout this continuous civil and human rights struggle, we all would not have a path to follow. But someone once said, we all know how beautiful a well-made clock can be. When each gear is functioning properly, it works as a viable unit, ticking away the minutes and the hours with a proud precision. The African American community, the white community, and our unity as a human race is rather like that clock. Composed of many parts, this event this evening in our country brought on the functioning of the many units of which it is composed. And like that clock, when all these units are working well together, it's truly a joy to behold. Now, many feel that the jobs of our public figures is to look after these gears or our clock and to see the functioning of its units. As citizens, activists, and filmmakers, many of us do our part to contribute to this working clock. As citizens, many of us are perplexed by many actions that are taken in various situations. We hear about social problems, do nothing, and yet there's others, such as myself, just have to act, moved by my inner spiritual force. I come to you this evening in the spirit of the late Mrs. Mammie Mobley and the legacy of her son, Emmett Till, asking you to help keep the fire of this movement burning and to also continue to keep our eyes on the prize until truth and justice reigns in this country. Although I'm truly overwhelmed by the accolades I received over the years, we still have to remember that we're still far from the courtrooms and far from stopping the injustices that we see here in this country and abroad. Now that I have your undivided attention, I must embrace this moment to embrace two persons that we hold in high regards, persons that we all come to love and respect. I speak of Dr. Martin Luther King, one who believed that the racial issue that we confront in America is not a sectional, but a national problem. One who believed that the strains towards blacks are tightly wrapped around the American character. One who fought long and hard for equal opportunity for all people. And then there was Sister Rosa Parks, a seamstress who apparently got so tired that one day she refused to get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It was sad because of this refusal, the civil rights movement then mobilized in position. Well, today and this evening, I would not degrade or disrespect our great leaders of our past. But one must remember that before there was a Dr. King and before there was a Rosa Parks, it was Emmett Till that sparked the black resistance of the South, better known to us all as the American Civil Rights Movement. It's because of Till's death being foremost in Sister Parks' mind that she refused from getting up from that seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It was because of Till's death that led a 26-year-old Martin Luther King in his decision of taking on the Montgomery bus boycott. But no matter how you look at these beginnings of the movement, there's many things that cannot be debated. The lynching of Emmett Till woke the sleeping giant of black people across this globe. And of course, the movement, in my opinion, was destined to happen. The year was 1955. The day was August 28th. The place was the Delta of Mammie, Mississippi, a case that has shocked and haunted a nation for more than 7 decades, a case that is still unresolved, the untold story, the lynching of Emmett Till. A child who begged his mother, the late Mrs. Mammie Mobley, to let him go down to the Deep South to visit relatives, a vacation that would not only be remembered by his family, now the whole world. Little did Mrs. Mobley think that in a week's time, her son Emmett, her only child, would be abducted from his great uncle's home and tortured for one of the oldest taboos of the South, addressing a white woman in public. 2 men were soon arrested, but later acquitted in a court of law by an all-white, all-male jury. Then 4 months after this dreadful crime, Roy Bryant and J.W. Mammie confessed to the lynching of Emmett Till to a reporter by the name of William Bradford Huey, who had then published their story in Look magazine for $4,000. Of course, this sent shockwaves across the globe, and many felt it would cause a change, unfortunately, that we're still fighting for. By now, you're looking at each other and thinking, why not? Why is this case so important to discuss in this day, where terrorism hits all of us in here this evening? For hundreds of years, our ancestors have been terrorized, and this act of terrorism existed far before 9/11. And unfortunately, as you can see, it continues on. This case is important. It's important because we must never forget those who paved the way for us to exist in this free society. It's important, like Reverend Jesse Jackson would even say, with no sense of history, we only exist in a vacuum. How can you respect boxer Mike Tyson without understanding Joe Louis? How can you respect gospel singer Yolanda Adams without knowing that she stands on the shoulders of people like Mahalia Jackson? You see, it's very important we know the truth surrounding this murder and many more. For if we forget our past, history will repeat itself. Why is it that we're still in a world where dragging a man to death like James Byrd isn't good enough that you want to desecrate his grave to prove a point? Why do we still live in a country where strange fruit continues to hang from the trees of magnolia abroad? You see, it's important that we know the truth, not only for the Emmett Till case, but many other cases that have been quite colossal to American history, and that's being made a part of history even today. As we look around us today, we think about the American dream. For many of us, it's still far from being fully realized. Inequality is still prevalent. There are still neighborhoods that are segregated by race and income. We still see protests for those who have lost their lives in this ongoing struggle. Our criminal justice system continues to be disproportionately affect communities of color, and economic opportunities remain elusive for many. These are the realities that we must confront as we commemorate the 70th anniversary of Till's death, which took place last week. From what I heard, Newport News is a vibrant city that welcomes individuals from diverse backgrounds. The universities and colleges are dedicated to nurturing an atmosphere of open dialogue and progress. Yet even in the progressive communities that we see, we're not immune to the challenges that many leaders of our past sought to address. We still see divisions that separate us, misunderstandings that pit us against each other, and the systemic issues that continue to marginalize entire groups of people. These issues may not look different today than they did in 1955. They may look different, but they're still present and they still require attention. Injustice in one part of the world or in one community has a ripple effect that ultimately affects those who suffer the most from inequality. It is our responsibility, as Dr. King taught us, true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. The true measure of a society is not how it treats its most privileged, but how it treats the most vulnerable. The struggles of the 1950s, racial equality, economic equality, access to education and healthcare are not struggles of our past. They are struggles of our present. But they are also struggles for the future. We must ask ourselves, what kind of future are we actually building here? We must understand what the future and what kind of building that we must do. Are we building a future where every child, regardless of race and economic status, are getting the right education and opportunities to succeed? Are we building a future where people can live without fear of being unjustly targeted and treated unfairly because of their race and identity? As a community, I know Newport News have made some strides toward exclusivity and equity, but there's much more to be done. As we think about the future, we must understand and remember that justice requires more than just awareness. It requires action, whether it's in the form of peaceful protest, political activism, or community organizing. We must stand up and speak out against the injustices plaguing our society, and we must do so in a spirit of love, compassion, and unity. But let us also recognize that the fight for justice is not always visible. It's not just about marching in the streets of America, but it's about the quiet acts of some individuals and the solidarity that happen every day. The conversations we have with our neighbors, the opportunities that we afford or that we give to those who have been disenfranchised or underserved. The advocacy that we do to ensure that our systems of power truly serve the needs of all people. Justice is not just about confronting what we see. It's about changing the unseen and the unspoken. It's the spaces where we listen to understand and actively challenge the structures of inequality. It doesn't matter what difference or where we all come from. What matters is our shared goal to build a world that's just, where everyone's rights are respected and where peace isn't just an idea, but something that we live every single day. The challenges that we face, whether it's systemic racism, economic inequality, or the lack of access to resources are real, but so is our power. When we come together as one, when we fight not just for ourselves, but also each other, we have the ability to shift the tides. We've done it before, of course, and we certainly can do it again. We've always had the power to create change, but it's only when we stop letting our differences divide us and start seeing ourselves as one people that we all truly make a lasting and great impact. See, my journey as an activist, if you want to call me that, began when I was just 10 years old. I grew up in the Deep South, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I remember one day when I was sitting in my parents' study going through old vintage magazines that they kept over the years. When I pulled out a magazine and I'm thumbing through it and I come across the story of Emmett. There I was, seeing this angelic face of this 14-year-old boy, sort of a mirror image of myself at that time. And then on the other side of this page was this horrific face of this monster. I could not seem to wrap my head around what I was looking at. It just so happened my parents was walking past the study and they looked in on it. I can remember my mother walked in and she looks over my shoulder and she finds that I discovered that horrific photograph of Emmett Till. My father walks in the study and I looked at them both and they both looked at themselves and they said, I think it's time to tell him the story. Right then and there, they sat me down and began to tell me the story of Emmett Till the way that they learned. But throughout my life, the name Emmett Till kept resurfacing. When I got to high school, I was interracially dating. The first thing my parents would tell me before I left the house at night was, don't let what happened to Emmett Till happen. So it became an educational tool to teach me about the racism that still exists in this country today. But it wasn't until 2 weeks before my high school graduation when I would have what I was assumed to be my real run-in with racism. And that was when I was assaulted by an undercover police officer in 1989 for dancing with a white classmate of mine. There I was, taken into a room of the nightclub, handcuffed to the chair, beaten across my face as if I was someone's punching bag. A moment in my life I still have problems talking about even today. Of course, this is no way in comparison to what happened to young Emmett Till, but it was my wake-up call. It was that call for me to make sure that I put myself in a position of power so that these type of acts would never happen to a person ever again. It was at that moment I really devoted my life to this struggle. Said I'll go to college, to Southern University here. We have some Hampton folks in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got some powers. All right, I gotta acknowledge you guys. But it was at that moment I said, you know what? In order for me to make sure that this doesn't happen to a person ever again, I have to put myself not only in a position of power, but work with a system to fight against this going on issue. So I decided to study criminal justice at Southern University of Baton Rouge in hopes of becoming a civil rights attorney. But then towards my junior year of college, I was introduced to filmmaking by a childhood friend and my best friend actually, who moved to New York City and began to work with his sister in her film production company. So I devoted my life to this ongoing struggle and always have been told to speak for the voiceless and those who have never been heard. And just as my parents had taught me the story of Emmett Till, I hope this evening would enlighten you as well in learning the story and propel you and energize you to go back out into your communities and make a difference. Preserving history plays a pivotal part in addressing systemic and racism and inequality. When we recognize the historical roots of these issues, we're better equipped to fight against the enemy. By telling complete stories of our history, we ensure that the struggles and triumphs are not buried or forgotten. And through my work, I have sought not only to honor Emmett Till's memory, but to expose the deep-rooted injustices that have plagued our community and our country for a very long time. However, although we did not receive courtroom justice that I was fighting for in the Till case, the legacy of my late friend, Mammie Till Mobley, must never be forgotten. She was a beacon of courage, and her strength in the face of unimaginable loss sparked a movement that continues to shape the fight that we're in today. Her example is the blueprint for all struggle, our own struggle for racial progression, and liberation in America. This fight continues not just for her or for Emmett, but for all of those who have suffered in silence for every generation to come. And as I carry forward her mission, I do so in our great leader as well, Dr. Martin Luther King, who called for working to ensure that the justice for Emmett Till and other victims of racial injustice is not forgotten. Together we can ensure that the call for justice, which rose so powerfully in the death of Emmett Till, is carried forward in every action that we take. Laws, meaning that I champion the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crimes Act and the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act are direct results of the tireless pursuit for justice. The victories, these steps forward remain these steps forward remind us that while the road to justice is long and often painful, progress is not impossible. We are seeing the impact of Till's legacy in real time today. And I say this because there was some words that Mother Mobley left with me before she passed away. She would often tell me this time and time again, and I didn't quite understand because I was so young at that moment in time. But she would say to me often, Keith, we must continuously tell Emmett's story until man's consciousness is risen, because only then there will be justice for Emmett. Those words, as I look back on them and as I recite them in my head, and I think about it, was prophetic in many ways. And what she was trying to instill, not only in me, but in us, that although Emmett Till's lynching took place in 1985, there are many Emmett Tills of today. She understood early on that although her son had been brutally murdered, that this fight was going to continue on. So in her words, I would like to introduce you to Till, which I think embodies her so greatly. And what I would like to do after the screening, and if we have some time, I would stand back and we could do some Q&A if you have any questions, because there's a lot that's involved with not only the film, because the film was only produced to continue the movement that I had started with the documentary that led to the reopening of the case in 2003. So this is the extension of that ongoing fight. With no further ado, and I want to thank everyone for having me. Here is